Now you know it's a lie. Everybody knows this is a lie. Start dealing with the truth and things will start changing. Thanks again to the anarchist mob for promoting the history of this country, something that everyone needs to know where you're standing, because you're standing on stolen sacred land. And you got it through acts of genocide and terrorism. That's the reality, isn't it? Where's the treaty? Now when someone brings a fleet of ships to your country, that's an act of war and aggression for a start. When they stick their flag in it and claim it as their own, that's an act of war and aggression.
That's right.
Have a look in 1786. Fulfill it. Apply the laws of war to this land and waters. Now this is the discovered, they called this unoccupied land, but before that was called New Holland. But the British discovered New Holland. It's all lies, people. It's all lies. It's time to stand up. Save this place for our children, what's left. You know, we're hemorrhaging in terms of our lives, our culture. The same is for the environment as well. You know, there's a parallel between genocide and ecocide. It's got something to do with the customary law of the land. Anyway, thank you, I'm going on too long here. Thank you. Australia is a crime scene. It's a stolen wealth. And everybody in this country today, including other blackfellas, are living off the proceeds of that crime. Let's get this straight, one time. Tell me if I'm wrong. Why aren't we, as a people, the conscientious Australians here, and the Aboriginal people, creating a situation where we can go to the International Criminal Court of Justice? We may not do any good there, but we can at least put this country's shocking history on the record for everybody in the world to see. On behalf of the Aboriginal people of Australia, I'd like to welcome you to this country. I'm sure that most of you haven't had that welcome. But I want to pay an acknowledgement to the true sovereigns of the land that we're standing on now, and that's the Kulin Nation, made up of a number of tribes of the Kulin there, the Bunurong, Wurundjeri, Wurrung, Wathrung, there's a number of them, but we're on the land of the Wurrung here today. So I just want to pay my respect to them, also respect to their ancestors, all of our ancestors, creator ancestor Bunjil, and we're going to do our smoking ceremony. It's our way of paying respect and recognising our ancestors. So, thank you.
169 years ago, Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheener, two Indigenous men from Tasmania, were hung on this very spot. They were hung for the very reason that people on the 25th of April gather in their thousands across this nation to honour those Australians who have fought to maintain this country. These men were hung for the very same reason. They were executed publicly before a quarter of Victoria's population for having the audacity to be involved in armed struggle against the colonisers. They were the last survivors of a proud people in Tasmania who lost a 33-year war which commenced in 1803, which saw the population of Tasmania reduced from about 15,000 down to 82 by 1835. And of those 82, 16 were brought across to Victoria to civilise the Victorian blacks. And within 12 months, everybody forgot about them. They were left to their own devices. So 5 of them, Tunnerminnerwait, Planobeena, Pyterruner, Maulboyheener and Truganini, took to the bush. They knew how the whites, the colonisers, conducted warfare. They were involved in a 7-week war, 2 men and 3 women, which saw many of the colonisers in the Mornington Peninsula, the Dandenong Ranges, the Dandenongs, flee back to Melbourne. It was a struggle which was conducted with compassion. They burnt down homesteads, but before they burnt down the homesteads, took guns and food, they released the women and children. And the only two people who died in this affair were two whalers who were caught in the crossfire. 7 weeks after they began their struggle, they were captured. They were brought to Melbourne and they were tried. The two men, Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheener, were found guilty, and the 3 women were found innocent. And the 3 women were released back into the care of George Augustus Robinson, who was the Aboriginal detective who brought them across from Tasmania. They were brought here a few weeks later and hung as an example. In June, five months later, 3 European bushrangers were hung on this spot. And on the 5th of September 1842, a man called Roger, an Indigenous man called Roger from Port Fairy, was also publicly executed on this spot. And they were taken down the road and buried under where the Queen Victoria Market is, where I hope you will come with us later on. So why are we here today? We're not here just to recognise the past. The Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheener Commemoration Committee has a number of objectives. 1, it's to hold a yearly commemoration on the 20th of January at the site the execution took place, and that's what's happening now. 2, we want to publicly acknowledge the injustice of what happened in January 1842. Men and women who fought for their homes, their land, their freedom, executed on this soil, while on the 25th of April, we celebrate the same sacrifice. Thirdly, we want to highlight, this is not just a historical reenactment, this is a political act that we are making. We want to highlight the unfinished business that still exists between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. It is not over. There's no treaty. There's no acknowledgement of the past. There's no compensation. It is not over. This act of ours is to highlight that. And fourthly, we are working towards the establishment of a significant public monument to publicly acknowledge what happened on that fateful day. If you walk around this city, there are millions of monuments to European colonisers. Every street in the central city is named after, and many of the people who were involved in this travesty have streets named after them in the city. But there are no significant public monuments. And those of you who remember back to 2006, because we tend to forget our history, will remember that some of the Indigenous activists who are here today who will be speaking were hounded, condemned, denigrated, assaulted because they had the audacity to occupy a corner of King's domain during the Commonwealth Games to highlight that dispossession. So this is a political act. This is no historical reenactment. Now, first of all, I'd like to call on Sharon Fibrace to speak. She's a well-known Indigenous activist here in Victoria. She has a long pedigree of activism, and I wouldn't cross her.
That's gathered here today, and how fitting it is that this be the event that starts the year off in 2011, and every year. I really must commend Joe Toscano and the Commemoration Committee for having the foresight to bring such an issue like this, such an event like this before the public. A round of applause, please. Because they are truly giving recognition to Australia's First Nations people. And that is what we are doing here today, commemorating the work of the freedom fighters, those who went before us, Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheener, and their great story. It really is legendary. It is part of our history. It should be part of our civilization and our culture and the knowledge of it. And the fact that if you were to go down Swanston Street and survey a number of people down there, particularly those who have been through the education system, you'll realise it's not in the education system, because the Australian education system has been whitewashed, regards black rights, a black presence, and the whole issue of terra nullius. You know, that they've thought and, of course, attempted to whitewash the history pages of Australia's history books of Aboriginal people, our place, and indeed our identity. But thanks to these two heroes, these two men, these two warriors that stood even to the point of sacrificing their own lives, that the truth may come forward, that they would stand for Aboriginal identity, Aboriginal culture, our ideologies, our beliefs, everything that we stood for. And I think that they're extremely visionary in their time, because I think that they could see after the first 60 years of occupation the threat to Aboriginal lifestyle, and of course to our future, to our genealogy. And of course we can see that what followed, if they hadn't put up the defence that they put up, there would have perhaps been even greater destruction that would have come upon Aboriginal people, particularly the acts of genocide in the attempt to abolish us, to wipe us out, and to subject us to treacherous acts by government, and later on, of course, through academia, and of course through bringing upon us terrible, treacherous genocidal laws like the Protection Act administered by the Protection Board, by police and welfare officers, that is still prevalent today. And as Joe said, really, has it finished? We'd have to say no. And this is, I think, what Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheener could see, that the fight of resistance had to be there at that point in time, that the leadership had to stand up and had to stand in the gap. Because as we know, the saying is, if we don't fight, we lose. If we don't fight, we lose. Whether we're talking about union issues, whether we're talking about civil and political rights issues, if we don't stand, if we don't fight, then we lose. And that's what it's about. And that's what we've seen in Aboriginal leadership. As the unions have stood with us in the leadership that came from the Cumbragun Mission in the 1930s, and the leadership in the unions, of the left unions that is, that has stood with us over an 80-year period, and all the left organisations, some of the churches and some of the groups in society have stood to defend us. And it's through our working with them, through the alliances that we have built, that has drawn great relationships. And so we've learnt that as the world's got bigger, that we've seen allies in similar leadership where they have stood to stand and to defend that which is right, and that which brings an inclusion of our identities into a huge, bigger culture. And so we can look at some examples of those. Even Che Guevara, that stood as a great leader in his time. You know, William Cooper in the 30s, that stood as a great leader in his time with William Ferguson and Bill Onus. We can look to those that have hit the world stage as tremendous leaders, and then have captivated the minds and been a tremendous inspiration to others. And in concluding, that is exactly what Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheener have been. They only need to be written into the history books, but we know that those that are digging for truth, those that are digging for right history, know of this, and I think that's part of us here today, and that is what we are celebrating. So let's not think that the job's been done, it's only just begun. And let's get into it in 2011. Thank you.
Some justice.
Another victory for the original people.
3 cheers for the T&M story. Hip hip. Hooray! Hooray! Hip hip. Hooray! Hooray!
Robbie, you got something to say, mate?
Well, that's the first of many, I suspect.
That's it.
Probably about 5,000 monuments to go here.
That's it. The start.
Come on,
Remember, they have no rule of law. Who else wants to talk?
Can everybody come up to the front?
Yeah.
Put Alan in the front. She was the...
Alright, bunch up everybody. Come on, Alan, grab
Just press, just look and press. Not working, is it
I
on?
might have turned it off.
Is it on?
Yeah, it's on now.
Off you go.
I always have this habit.
Here we go. Keep going.
Go and do a few more.
Just hold it down, it'll do more.
It focuses itself. Unless you want to come in close. Go back further.
That's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Look, I'd like to thank you all. It has been a long journey, but this is a historic moment because this is the first such memorial in a major city in this country. And when it's built in the next 18 months, it will act as an example to ordinary citizens, ordinary people about what we can do by applying the right political pressure and also the right social pressure. And this is why this will be a template for every town and every city in this country, because the Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheener story, as you all know, is just a fraction of the stories of resistance which occurred during the colonisation process. And the fact that it's on the Melbourne CBD, it is a major capital city, unanimous approval by the council, and we've been able to stare down all these people who for so long have denied everything, from terra nullius to now. So it is a great historic moment, and you are now participants in this journey which has begun today. It is a great story and you should all be congratulated. Wonderful story. And it just shows, and in this period now, between now and the removal of the Abbott government, it'll be people like us who will force change in this country. Yeah. So all you young people here, talk to other young people. All your old people, don't die. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all.
Passed a resolution to set up a process and distribute funds for the erection of the Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheener Memorial in Melbourne CBD. It's been a long campaign, and I'd like to thank all those people who've been involved in that campaign over the years, and especially those who braved the elements last night and packed the Melbourne City Council meeting. And despite the best efforts of conservative and reactionary elements in the city of Melbourne to actually attempt to put pressure on councillors to knock this attempt to erect a memorial out of the water, the Melbourne City Council stood fast. A group of conservatives and reformers stood fast and passed the necessary resolution to ensure that the memorial will be built in the next 12 to 18 months. And this particular struggle is important because the very same people that are involved in the neoliberal struggle to put the interests of unaccountable corporations before the interests of citizens and residents are actually at the forefront of that struggle to deny this country's black history, this country's Indigenous history. Because if you deny the colonisation process and the brutality of the colonisation process, and you deny that this land was stolen, that no treaty was ever signed, you can then manipulate the economy to suit you. So this is a very important victory which could not have been achieved without this radio program and the ability for me to communicate to people across the country, in every state in this country, through the community radio network. Without that ability, this project would have never got off the ground. I mean, this is the first time in this country's history that a major monument to the frontier wars, which occurred over a century, almost a century and a quarter, is publicly acknowledged in a major city in the CBD. Obviously, there are memorials across the country, but this will be a significant memorial to two men, Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheener, who were hung on the 20th of January 1842 for having the audacity to resist colonisation. While across this country a few days ago, men and women and children gathered to honour the sacrifice and men and women who in the majority of cases lost their lives fighting other people's wars in other lands. There's only a handful, less than a handful of monuments in this city and in this country which actually have been erected to act as a permanent reminder of the fact that men, women and children gave up their lives to protect a way of life and lands they had looked after for over 40,000 years. So this is a historic victory. It's a historic victory for the Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheener Committee. It's a historic victory for the people who listens to this program. It's a historic victory for the people of Melbourne, and it's a historic victory for the people of this country, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. This is a story which involves each and every one of us. So put it in your diary. 20th of January 2015, midday, near the corner of Bowen and Franklin St, Melbourne, or go to the website tunnermall.org for information regarding the ceremony next year and hopefully the year after. The monument will have been erected. So by 2016 we'll be actually able to have the monument there. But the important thing is this can act as an example to people across this country what dedication and commitment and political struggle can achieve, not just regarding this issue, but regarding many other issues that we are involved with here on the anarchist world this week. Because ultimately, every step we have taken forward as a race, as humanity, has begun with a first step. And people who may have seen out of step with the norms of the general community when they began that struggle, whether it was the abolition of slavery, whether it was universal suffrage, whether it was women's rights, with persistence and tenacity become the norm. And that's what we need to remember. It's that we, together, united, give up our time, we will ultimately be successful. So thank you to all those who turned up last night to pack the gallery. It was good to see that the Melbourne City Council passed the resolution unanimously to actually put in place a process and a budget and a site for this memorial to be erected, irrespective of the pressure from the reactionary conservative elements in the society who have dominated debate in all fields for far too long. You know who you are, those who are involved. You know who you are, those of you who are on the pledge list, and we'll contact you in the next few days. You all know who you are. You are part of a social movement which is interested in pursuing the idea of a reconciliation, not based on charity, but reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians based on justice, based on the signing of a treaty. A reconciliation process that cannot begin without the acknowledgement of the past, and that's what the Tunnerminnerwait and Maulboyheener Memorial is about. It's about that acknowledgement. So congratulations. Listen to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia on the community.